David Alemian, and I want to welcome you to the David Alemian Show. Today, I have Alan R. Cates. He is an award-winning journalist, trauma educator, and board-certified expert in emergency crisis response. Over a 35-year career, interviewing U.S. and Canadian officers, he developed Cop Shock, Surviving Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, PTSD, now in its expanded second edition and widely cited as the seminal self-help guide for law enforcement personnel and their families. Cates holds a Master of Fine Arts in Writing, certificates in trauma stress management and suicide intervention. His writing, counseling, and keynote work focus on destigmatizing psychological injuries, teaching resilience techniques, and equipping agencies to recognize and mitigate delayed onset PTSD, an issue he documented years before it entered mainstream discourse. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Alan R. Cates, author of Cop Shock. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
And thank you for coming on to the show today. I appreciate it. Here, let me just jump right in with, I want to start the conversation out with a question. Cop Shock, Cop Shock exposed police PTSD before many agencies even used the term. Let me ask you a question. Nationwide, there's a shortage of first responders. In your view, how has awareness of PTSD affected first responder recruitment and retention here in 2025?
I'm sorry to say that, well, first of all, I began this project in the 90s. The first edition of Cop Shock came out in 1999. The second edition came out in 2008. And everything in it is still very pertinent, but there has not been a lot of change in departments to recognize that police officers, paramedics, anybody involved as a first responder can develop PTSD. And I wish I could say different, but unfortunately, those just aren't the facts. There are some departments that have wised up and realize that if you lose a police officer or a paramedic, you've lost your investment. And I know this, I hate saying this because I believe in cops and paramedics and what they do, and I've seen what they do firsthand, and I really relate to them. But I'm talking money because that's the only language that police departments and other organizations seem to understand. And in Cop Shock, I go into a great deal of detail about how much money they will save if they provide peer support departments, if they encourage their officers to get help, and if they really support them. And to my dismay, maybe they just don't seem to have taken that to heart. I'll just give like one example. Let's take a police officer in Los Angeles who's been on the force for about 5 years. The department has invested more than $500,000 in that officer's training. And then 5 years is around the mark when things really start to go bad, when a lot of trauma accumulates and officers start to say, maybe I don't want to do this anymore, or I need help, but the department isn't there to help them. And they leave. So the department has lost all that money, and now they have to bring somebody else on and put in all that training and all that expense. So I'm talking to police chiefs and to commissioners and to cities, who have police departments. It's worth the investment because otherwise you will lose all that money.
We're on the same page. I understand a lot about turnover, the costs associated with turnover, and it is enormous. As a matter of fact, you're absolutely right on the money when you say it costs that much to replace someone. Because just people with skills, a Department of Labor statistic says it's 213% of salary to replace someone with skills. But when it comes to police and fire and EMTs and EMS, It's a greater expense because of all the training and supervision and onboarding it takes to bring someone on, and then the constant training. So yes, you lose that knowledge base. I agree with you 100%. You know,
So the big
delayed
question
on,
is, how
yeah,
do we wake them up? Because I've been trying for more than 20 years, and I have given seminars and talks all over the country. I've talked to police chiefs personally. I've received nice letters from police chiefs who said, "Yeah, we're going to do some of the stuff," and some of them do, but most of them don't. And it really comes down to money and who they report to.
you're absolutely correct because they only have a budget that's so big. And but here's the piece that I think they miss. And by the way, I agree with you 100%. They already have a turnover cost. It's a hidden cost.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, in other words, when you have a patrol car or some hard equipment, there's a line item in the budget and they know what that costs. You can see it. But turnover and training and all of these things that go with it is a hidden cost and they don't see it. You know, I got another question for you, and we'll come back to this in a second. Delayed onset PTSD can surface years after a critical incident.
Yeah.
What safeguards should chiefs build into their long term wellness plans? Speaking of budgets.
They need to have a department or a section of the department that will approach officers, because officers are not going to come to them, as was shown after 9/11, where they set up a whole area for officers to come and say, "Look, I'm experiencing a lot of stress." And you know what? They had like 22 people on duty and nobody came. So they realized they're not going to. So they went down to the site and they talked individually to officers. So they need to be really proactive. If something happens, they need to approach an officers through peer support. Peer support meaning it's a fellow officer who's been trained to talk to them. So it's not like the higher ups are coming in and saying, "Hey, we want to talk to you," and then we're going to report everything you say. Everything has to be
Sure.
confidential. Have to check in with them. That checking in is essential because you know what it tells a fireman, a firewoman, a cop? It says, "We care about you. We're looking after your interests. We have your back." Because they don't feel that now.
No,
And if they feel that the department has their back, then they're gonna thrive. That's what's gonna happen. You know that I did a great deal. I did 6 years of research before I wrote the book. And in that research, I found something I did not expect to find, which was many, many studies about the administration and their effect on police officers. And it showed that the single largest source of stress for officers was the department, was the administration. And that contributes a lot to a sense of cynicism, which filters into PTSD.
and as you know, stress can trigger PTSD symptoms.
Yeah.
And you know, for those living with PTSD, financial stress can trigger PTSD symptoms. You know, do you think that knowing that the future will be financially stable could reduce PTSD related attrition? In other words, they know off in the future they're gonna be okay, and that can reduce the symptoms and the outbreak of symptoms and the occurrence of symptoms, which can keep them from on the job and keep them from leaving. How do you feel about that?
I think they need to feel that, again, it comes down to the department and that they know that, look at all the training they put into me. And I feel they're really supporting me and I'm making a decent salary and I see raises in the future so that I can help my family. They need to feel that. But if they see constant turnover, that's a very bad sign that they're going
Oh,
to have a
turnover
career.
begets turnover.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. You know, Let me ask you a question. You mentioned when you wrote the book. What started you down that path?
Um, I had had contact with police officers, since in my early 20s. When I lived in Toronto and I was walking home from the streetcar one day, and these two guys come up to me and they're plain clothes. I mean, they didn't say right away they were cops, but I looked down at their shoes and I thought, this is wrong. You know, you know, people walking on a street in the beaches in Toronto don't wear these really heavy shoes. Anyway, so they asked me if I lived there. I said yes. So they said that they were going to do a drug bust and they needed a place to stage their operation. And could they use my house? I said, sure. So they came in, they did this operation, and then after that, we became friends, and they started staging a lot of their operations from my house. My neighbors were thrilled because there was always a cop car parked in front of my house several times in
Hmm.
a week. And I got to know them, I got to understand them. I saw the stress and the trauma that they experienced. And one of the chapters in Cop Shock is about the Toronto Police Service. But that's what got me started on it. And then years later, when I was living in Los Angeles, I came into contact with Detective Bill Martin from the Los Angeles Police Department. And he was a counselor as well. And I began talking to him about what it's like for cops at the LAPD. And he knew a lot. As a matter of fact, he wrote the foreword for Cop Shock, which is spectacular. He's a phenomenal person. And
Hmm.
that started it. And I did not intend to write a book. I was thinking of writing an extended article. And he sat me down and he said, you're going to write a book. And that's how it began.
Wow.
And
One
yeah, it
statement.
was spectacular. Yeah, he talked me into it. He also had a gun, so I thought, well, okay,
That's persuasion.
I'm kidding.
I know. So you're board certified in emergency crisis response. Which immediate post-incident practices make the biggest difference in career longevity?
Which business practices did you say?
No, which immediate post-incident practices? In other words, something happens. So what should they do after something happens to make the biggest difference in reducing the occurrence of PTSD, reducing
Uh,
symptoms, making it so
in
that they're going to stay there on the career? How can
Okay.
you help them?
In my book, I actually go into exactly that. I say, first day, what do you do on the first day? Then what do you do after that? On the first day, number one, you don't blame yourself. And I say the what happened is going to keep going around and around in your head over and over and over again. Do not read any newspaper stories about it. They frequently get things wrong. And don't be negative. No matter how bad it is, even if you think, well, did I have something to do with it? Right now, you have to look after yourself because otherwise you're going to go on a spiral. And that means, you know, being with loved ones, having a good dinner if you can eat. Many people cannot after they've experienced a trauma. Have a hot bath. Do the simple things that we do in our lives to try to feel better, because that's what's really important here. You stay away from prescription drugs if you can. Of course, any kind of drugs. You want to look to yourself, you want to look to your loved ones. That is what you want feeding you. Now,
Sure.
before this first day, and this is something I talk about in my book, is I would like everyone to create a game plan of some kind and ask yourself, if something really horrific happens, it's so beyond my grasp right now, who will I talk to? Who can I talk to who is going to sit there and listen to me, not offer advice, but just listen and understand? Because it's important that they don't offer advice. You're not asking for advice. You're you want someone to listen to what you have to say, and you're going to say it over and over and over again. And the days that follow, you're going to keep repeating it. And that person has to be really patient and understand that that is the process. So
Good
on that first
process.
day, it's about looking after yourself
Nice to
and
know that ahead of
not
time.
making assumptions of anything because you don't have the facts,
Sure, I
not on the
agree.
first day.
You know, speaking of that, departments often focus on physical gear grants, like we were mentioning before, line items that you can see and hold and touch and feel. Where should mental health funding rank in a strategic budget?
I think it should be number one. But of course, I'm a little prejudiced. But the
Yeah.
fact is, I mean, think about it. You're going to hire someone and pay a lot of money, and they're going to do a dangerous job. If you had asked me to do that, I'd think, okay, I'm getting the training, but what about if things go wrong? So
Hmm. Yeah. So,
then I need to know there's someone I can go to. There is peer support. There's someone who's going to help me.
right. Now you mentioned like, yeah, somebody who's going to help you. And oftentimes it could be a spouse, could be a brother, a sister, an aunt, an uncle, somebody close that you trust and feel comfortable with. What early warning signs of PTSD risk do you teach spouses and supervisors to watch for? The early warning signs that,
Early
okay,
warning
something bad
signs,
happened and now there's a
and this
problem.
is not actually in the diagnosis of PTSD, but
Hmm.
I interviewed over 200 police officers diagnosed with PTSD, and this is the first thing they talked about is they don't sleep.
Yep.
And that is barely mentioned in the diagnosis of PTSD, but it's a dead giveaway that you've been severely traumatized. And when I'm talking about not sleeping, I mean, so okay, you had a rough night last night, you didn't sleep that well. Then the second night, you have a rough night. A week later, every single night, you're not sleeping. You multiply this by days and weeks and months. And you know what a person looks like when they don't sleep. They're not making much sense. They can't put
Sleep
thoughts together.
deprivation.
Yeah. And that is a sign that that person is severely traumatized and not getting help. And that's what therapists are going to look for too. They're going to ask the question, how are you sleeping? It sounds so simple. You can ask yourself that question because already know the answer. So
Sure.
if you're not sleeping, then you got to start asking yourself, what's going on with me? And seek that help. And fellow officers and sergeants, lieutenants, captains, they can recognize when someone is not in their top form. And
Yeah,
in the past, the way police officers especially used to deal with this is they would have choir practice. Hey guys, let's go out to the bar and drink ourselves silly. And they would talk about what happened to them, but often not get much insight or help.
sure.
So choir practice does not help. Drinking yourself until you're sick does not help.
No, I get it.
But there
You
is
know,
one thing, again, I'm just going to put this one in
go,
here,
please, go.
because a lot of people don't think about it, but once they realize it, it really makes a lot of sense. Write down your feelings. And you think, oh, come on. I mean it. Write down your feelings. Because when you see them on paper, you read them and it's like, that's not as big a deal as I thought. Because when the feelings are coming out of the human, we're dramatists. Every one of us is. But when you see it on paper, you say, okay, I can see that. I can see how to deal with this. That's why
You're
journaling is
externalizing it.
important. Yeah,
You're
journaling is
externalizing
very
it.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Turnover costs can exceed, as I mentioned earlier, 200%. It can be over 200% of salary. And like we just said earlier, it's even higher for first responders. How does untreated trauma inflate those figures?
because it always comes back to bite you. It's, years later. And it can be through bad performance. You'll see, especially in police officers, they'll start to not care. They'll make bad arrests. It can lead to police
which leads to
brutality.
lawsuits.
Lawsuits, okay, now that's good. That's good. That's what you have to talk to the higher ups about. Do you want a
Hmm.
lawsuit? Because they quiver when you say that.
Right.
Because if you don't look after the quality of a police officer or firefighter's life, you're going to end up with a lawsuit because there are
And
things they.
lawsuits can have sometimes no limit. They don't
That's
know
right.
how expensive it's going
That's
to
right.
get.
You're talking about millions of dollars.
Right.
Yeah. Let
I
me give
developed a
you
system. Yeah, go ahead. Go
Okay,
ahead.
let me give you an example of
Yeah, sure.
because you were talking about delayed onset PTSD, which is it
Right.
appears years later. There's a police officer in New York named Jonathan Figueroa. He was in the K-9 unit, and he arrived about a day after 9/11, and he was then working on the pile for 98 days.
Oh man.
Right, no break. And he begged to be taken off halfway through. And they said, we can't afford to let you go. And he was looking for bodies and body parts, and he rarely even found them. But he was a mess. And but life goes on. Um, he was finished with that. He went on to other things. 5 years later, he goes to visit a fellow officer who's in the hospital. He got hit by a car. It wasn't too bad, but he was in the hospital, and he came apart. So it's like, wait a minute, this is totally unrelated to his work on the pile, but he didn't receive any counseling. He received no support when he worked on the pile. And he started shaking, he started stuttering. And as days went on, he started drinking. He would bring six packs to work and he'd drink them from his locker until finally he couldn't take it anymore. And he took his service revolver and put it in his mouth and said to himself, what am I doing? And he went to see his sergeant and he told the sergeant everything. And his sergeant said, well, I want you to go see this peer support group called Papa in New York. You probably heard of it. Um, uh, it was a police, it's not police officers, police organization providing peer assistance. It's a fantastic department. And
Hmm.
so he went to see them and they talked him through and they got him back on the job. See, they're not trying to fire him. They're not saying you're a bad guy. They're there to help you. And that's
To
what
help
peer
them
support is
work through
about.
it.
Yeah. And so instead of him losing his career, because he was afraid, I'm going to go to my sergeant? What's he going to do? This sergeant was a real smart guy. He knew what to do. And so Jonathan went back on the job, and as far as I know, he's still there.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's a nice story.
yeah,
You know, um, speaking of retention, because that's what a lot of this is about, because that's how we lose a lot of them.
yeah.
Do you have another success story where proactive mental health intervention kept a kept an officer from leaving prematurely? I mean, that was a great story. Do you have others like that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact.
Oh,
Uh,
share one.
okay,
I love happy endings.
Jimmy Brown. Jimmy
Uh-huh.
Brown, which had a really interesting history because
Hmm.
he was a police officer in New York and he hated it. He didn't like the work. He said because he was doing too much traffic detail. And so he decided to become a firefighter. And so he did. He quit
Yep.
the police department, became a firefighter. He was a probie right across the street from the World Trade Center. And so he was right there when the planes hit, and they just took off and went right to the Trade Center. And he climbed 20 something floors with hoses on his shoulders. The communication was very poor. Um, and so he was in the I think he was in the no, he was in the North Tower. Which was the
Hmm.
first tower to come down. So he was in the North Tower, and they decided, the group of them, this is not working out. There's something wrong here. And they turned around and they started going down the stairs, where others were going up the stairs and saying, "Where are you going?" And he told them, he said, "This is wrong. You got to leave." And they didn't. They continued up. And he went down, and it's like he said he got 100 feet from the building when the building came down. And he
Wow.
ran. Everybody ran. He ran, he jumped over a little wall and then was completely buried in concrete. He dug his way out, and he managed, so he survived. He ended up going to the hospital and he was okay, but he couldn't work. And he started having all these really bad thoughts. He didn't know what to do. But when he was a police officer, and actually this is a really important part of the story, before I get to that part, he then went to the administration for the fire department and told them that he needed help, he needed counseling. And they said, "Sorry, we don't have anything like that." So he then went to the police department where he used to work, and he knew about the group called Papa. And he said, "I need some help." And they helped him, and they got him back on the job in the fire department.
Isn't that nice?
So, yeah. So that just gives you an idea of like, man, so the fire department didn't have anything like that. The police did, and they helped the firefighters. And
You
as a
know
matter of
those.
fact, when I talked to the director of Papa, Bill Janae, he said
Yep.
when he brought his group down to the World Trade Center site, it wasn't just cops they were talking. They're talking to firefighters and paramedics, everybody.
You know those peer support teams and programs are great. Let me ask you a question. How do they compare with clinician-led models in terms of efficacy, effectiveness, and acceptance?
Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Well, the program you just described, where he got some help, is more
Yeah,
like a peer support kind of a program,
yeah.
as opposed to you go and you sit down with a psychiatrist, somebody, a doctor.
That's problematic for everyone who works in emergency services, because unfortunately it's been proven that a lot of what they say ends up going to the administration and affecting their careers.
That's
And
very problematic.
that was, yeah, always the case in New York City, where they had a critical incident. They had to go see the administration's psychiatrist, who would then report everything that they said, and many of them lost their jobs because of that. So that's how actually Papa came about, as an alternative to seeing the shrinks from the department. And so
Now,
that worked out really well. But let me just get into, and then
sure.
there's a critical incident stress management support, which is a whole organization that keeps confidentiality and helps everyone in emergency services. And they have different ways of operating. They have what's called a one-on-one, which is a peer support person talking to a police officer, a firefighter, and so on. Then they have diffusings, which may have everybody involved in just that small group. And then they have like major mobilizations where they can have 100 people there, and they go through all the issues that they're having. Um, in my experience, I've talked to a lot of police officers who have worked with this, and they said the one-on-ones are the most effective. And when you think about it, you're getting direct attention from a
Hmm.
person who has done what you have done, who understands you, and who has had training um, on these issues. And so that's been the most effective. It's peer
Very nice.
support, but the department is kind of iffy.
You know, that wasn't the answer I was expecting. And here's what
It
I
has
mean
to
by
do with,
that.
it's about confidentiality
That's
and their
it.
experience.
I wasn't expecting the confidentiality piece because
Yeah.
I would expect if you went to see a doctor that it would be confidential. But
Yes.
I
That's
guess it's not.
exactly that's what happened in New York. Because I talked to police officers who was this is before Papa. They said, "Yeah, I went to see the administration shrink, and I know he said something about reporting what I said, but I forgot.
Hmm.
He was traumatized. He's trying to get it off his chest. He needs help." And he said, I needed treatment. And next thing I know, I'm being called and they say, well, now you're a house mouse. Now we're taking your gun away, and you can sit at the desk until you're better. Well, how will I know when I'm better? I don't know. Doesn't work. You need somebody there who understands what you're going through.
Sure, sure. You've consulted with both urban and rural departments. Which settings, urban or suburban, or rural rather, urban or rural, which settings face the greatest PTSD related staffing threats?
I would have thought it would be the urban departments where you have
Hmm.
the greatest level of crime and incidents and trauma and all that. But the the small departments, because you have so few staff and not the best training, quite often they have the worst trauma and they
Oh
have
my.
nowhere to go because those departments cannot afford to create a peer support unit, or so they say. And my
Sure.
my reasoning to them, and I've talked to them, is that how can you afford not to have one? Because think about what happens. Your department has 5 officers. 2 of them are severely affected. Look at what you've just lost. You've almost lost half your department, and you've got
Right.
no one for them to talk to. And what did you do? Oh, well, I got PTSD, so we fired them. I've heard that over and over again. And it's
Wow.
and it's mostly from small departments, of which most of the departments in the United States are small.
Sure. Yeah. The less than 10 is
Yeah.
most of them. You know, if you let me ask you a question, because we talked about this as one of the first things we talked about was cost or investment. Remember, you said it's an investment. If you
Yeah.
had 5 minutes with the city finance director, how would you justify increased spending on trauma care as an investment, not a cost? If you had just 5 minutes to tell him,
Oh,
or
you're making this so easy for me. Just a minute. Let me find the right page here in my book because
okay,
I address exactly that. But I have facts and figures if I can only find them. Where did I put them? Here we are. Okay.
okay,
I have in Cop Shock on page 328. I go through how many? One, two, three, 4 different departments. And I do a comparison between what it was like when they did not have peer support and what it was like after they had peer support. And
mm-hmm,
overall, they said, number one, they're retaining officers. And number two, in their overall budget, they're more than 50,000 ahead each year. That's in the smaller departments. Now, then we have San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. This is fantastic. Okay. In one year, they had 8 stress retirements due to PTSD. But of course, PTSD wasn't recognized, but they found a way to retire them. Once they had their peer support, over the next 6 years, you know how many stress retirements they had? Zero,
how many? Wow,
zero, zero. And they said, as a result, they saved $1.5 million per officer, or a total savings of $12 million in retirement. I need 1 minute. I need 1 minute, and I'm going to show you a page from my book, Cop Shock, and I will read it to you because there are 4 examples of how you can save thousands to millions of dollars by having peer support for your officers or your firefighters or paramedics.
you know that speaks volumes, and you showed them the bottom line. You know,
Yeah, because you
we
know
could
what?
go
I hate
on.
to say it, but that's all they care about. Yeah, sure, they have feelings to everybody because they were probably once a firefighter or a police officer, but now they're up in upper management. This is what management is. And they look at the bottom line, and everything in their career depends on that bottom line. So I'm addressing that bottom line.
Great. Well, I could go on with this for hours with you. This has been great, but we're just about out of time. So I want to say thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your expertise with PTSD and first responders and police and fire because, you know, the world needs to be made aware. And I thank you for that. I really
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Well, this is David Alemian, and it's another episode of the David Alemian Show. Thank you for watching.